I moved myself to Washington, DC when I was in my late 20s because I always wanted to be a correspondent, always wanted to live in Washington. And I moved over, so it was my dream gig. There was a lot that I had attached to that in a way. And in 2008, I was walking down the street. Life was grand. I had all my friends worked in the White House. I had this amazing job freelancing as a TV reporter and producer with Reuters, Al Jazeera English, the Seven Network, and the Pentagon Channel. So my job was to cover State Department, Pentagon, White House, all breaking news out of North America. It was pretty exciting. Very addictive to be part of an ultra high performance team that covered news. Taught me a lot about the dynamics of trust. And one day I was walking to the Al Jazeera bureau on K Street, and you really feel like you're centre of the universe in Washington, that's for sure, especially when the Obama administration was in office. I was walking down the street, and for the first time in my career, I did not pick up a copy of the New York Times or a newspaper. And if you're a journo, you never walk into the newsroom not knowing what's going on. You're scanning the headlines before you go in. So you've got some idea about what you're going to be assigned for the day. But instead of picking up a newspaper from a newsstand, I was reading the news on my BlackBerry, on my smartphone. And I stopped and I thought, wow, I am a journalist who's paid to produce content. But as a consumer, I'm not prepared to pay for it. Right? Interesting moment. And I literally stopped on the sidewalk and I thought, this is a really interesting signal of change. And the signal of change is me. It's my behaviour. So what if my behaviour scales? What if 10,000 people stop picking up a newspaper? This is 2008. What if 1 million people stop watching the 6 p.m. news? What does life look like then for a TV reporter who's already working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week and only earning a barely livable wage? So I had 100 feet between that moment and getting into the bureau. And in that 100 feet, I started running scenarios in my head. What if this gets worse? What if life gets harder for me? And none of the scenarios I liked at all. So I started thinking, what if I left journalism now? Like, what if I opted out now and upskilled in other areas so I could be better prepared for this change? Because it was clear to me in that moment that the business model of news was failing right in front of me and I was a part of it. And I went up to the newsroom and I so clearly remember saying to my colleagues, hey, just out of interest, have you got a plan B? Like, what would you do if you weren't coming into the newsroom every day? What would you do if this bureau shut down? And everyone said to me in separate private conversations, oh, that is ridiculous. That is never going to happen. We're in television. That's what people would say to me. We're in television. People very attached to their status and their identity as news reporters. And I thought, that doesn't sound good to me. And I, in a matter of weeks, resigned, walked out on my very amazing career because I knew I wanted to be 5 to 10 years ahead of this enormous wave of change that was coming our way as reporters. And of course it did. So I stepped out and I went to work in humanitarian aid, and I ended up working not long after that, getting a job, a phenomenal job, working in a major aid organisation to bring relief to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. But that was my moment of change where I realised when I'm running all these what-if scenarios, which is what a pilot does, they run these what-if scenarios. What if that happens? What if this happens? But as I said, they're skewing towards the negative. It's okay to recognise what the negative is, but what's important is interrupting that script that we have, that default pattern of thinking, and think, what's the positive here? What if this change allows me to upskill and be 10 years ahead of everyone else when they realise that the business model is failing and life is going to look a lot harder for people who don't see that change. And it's very disruptive, by the way.
It is.
Like, I put my life in a blender and threw a grenade in there a couple of times. But I knew if I didn't do that, someone else was going to do that for me. And that was going to be far more painful and disruptive than me taking control of what that change was going to look like. And so when we talk about what we can and can't control, we've got to be realistic. There are a lot of things we can't control, but we've got to look at what's our response and our behaviour in that moment where we know change is going to be disruptive. It's going to hurt. It's going to be painful. But it's way more painful when someone else forces that change on you, I think.